in its simplest form is when an organisation deploys its talent, so its people, across country borders for business purposes. The in-house professionals, part of their role is to really be able to understand what's out there and articulate that back to the business. The employees' expectations don't typically change. If you boil it down in payroll, they just want to be paid accurately and on time.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast, the show that explores the latest insights and innovations in the world of payroll. Today's episode of the Payroll Podcast is sponsored by Deel. Now take a moment to consider the following pre-show scenario. Imagine you had to visit 6 different houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and the pans, another has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate exactly the same way, using 6 different tools and platforms just to pay their global workforce. But now there's one platform offering truly simple, truly global payroll, and that's today's sponsor. That's Deel. That's Deel. And Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise company, a small business, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, and more, Deel's fully managed global payroll eliminates third-party handovers and instead provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes in payroll regulations before they even become an issue. And with 24/7 monitoring and best-in-class security protocols, your sensitive data is always protected. So are you ready to change your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book your demo with Deel today. Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JJ Recruitment Group. We're specialist global payroll recruiters. And today we're going to be really delving into the intricacies of global mobility and payroll, something we haven't really discussed on the show before. But before we get into that, just a quick reminder for me, if you are a regular listener to the show, please do remember to subscribe to the show if you can. Please do share it with all of your payroll colleagues and friends. We're really trying to raise the profile of global payroll for everyone. And that's really, really important and super helpful for me. I'll be really grateful if you can do that. And of course, if you get one extra spare moment, leave us a review as well. Now, today, I'm really excited to have David McAlister with me on the Payroll Podcast, a seasoned expert in global mobility who brings over 18 years expertise in managing the complexities of international workforce mobility. David, really, really great to have you on the show today. I know you've got an extensive background at some leading companies, including Global Expat Pay and EY, and you've been really heavily involved in really reshaping how global mobility integrates with payroll and payroll systems in particular. So I'm really excited to bring a new subject area to the show today and really keen to understand your insights on how global mobility is really evolving within the payroll landscape. So without further ado, listeners, please do welcome David McAlister to the Payroll Podcast, because today we're going to be navigating the complexities of global mobility in payroll. David, how are you feeling? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Nick. And yeah, thanks for the great intro. I'll try and do that some justice as we go through today. But yeah, thanks for having me.
No, I'm really, really delighted to have you on the show. And also, I reached out to you on LinkedIn after being following a lot of your articles and posts you've been posting about this subject. So you really are out there with some really, really great content. I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for those that are as eager as I am to follow your future posts. But before we jump into the space of global mobility, I'm going to ask you a question I ask all of my guests, which is this. What does the word payroll mean to you?
Yeah, well, obviously a great question. And as a fan of the pod, I've heard many answers to this. So for me, it's much more than a routine financial process. Hopefully that goes without saying. In the world of global mobility, it represents a critical link between the business and the employee. And given that's in global mobility, it's usually at a time where that individual is working outside of their home location. Payroll ensures those individuals are compensated accurately. It also encompasses lots of complexities that we'll get into today around tax, social security, different legal frameworks, different currencies. And really, payroll for me is about fairness and transparency, no matter where you're working within the world. And I've actually seen those who master this topic within global mobility can really raise the assignees' experience, which helps lead to more successful assignments and therefore actually helps supports broader organisational goals.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, great start. So just want to, for those that aren't necessarily familiar, we're in a world of globalization now, in particular for payroll. Like we've seen more payroll operations, payroll functions and organizations take their workforce globally because they're now hiring in remote locations or they're moving people around in terms of international assignments. Before we jump into what that really means and what the concept of global mobility even is, I just wondered if you could anchor the show a little bit with your expertise, your background, how you've come interspersed with the world of both global mobility and payroll that's led us to being on the show here today.
Yeah. Well, I refer to myself as a global mobility lifer, so it's all I've ever done in my career. You mentioned I'm now in the 18th year of my career. In that time, though, I've done a number of different roles. So I've been in-house, so helping companies manage their global mobility programs. I've been on the vendor side, doing various things from immigration to payroll, tax. I've been a international employee myself, so I've been commuting across to Germany for an extended time and also relocated my family out to a real hardship location of Dubai. And also, as you mentioned, I'm involved in helping launch a tech startup, which was specifically to use technology to solve some of the challenges in global payroll. Throughout that time, there has always been some element of payroll and compensation within my roles. It's key to most global mobility programs. And that's not just for assignees, but also any type of cross-border workers, which we can talk a bit more on later. In the 18 years, mobility has evolved. Traditional assignment types have now expanded into many different types of workers. And I think more recently, employees' expectations have completely changed in terms of working remotely from abroad, which you've touched on. And I think those trends will continue.
Nice. So help simplify the concept of global mobility then for me. For those that are listening, maybe they're payroll managers, they haven't necessarily needed to come across this yet, but if they haven't, there's a chance they probably will as the world continues to evolve. And just explain that its relevance in relation to payroll in particular.
Yeah, so global mobility in its simplest form is when an organization deploys its talent, so its people, across country borders for business purposes. So that can be on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis and anything in between. Why companies do that is to take advantage of a new market that they're not operating in currently. It can be to plug a skills gap they may have in one country compared to another, or it could even be to send an employee to learn new skills to then bring back to their home country. And it can even be, and this again, as I've mentioned, is a theme increasing, just to support the employee's aspirations. So if you have a high-performing employee who wants to do this, a lot of go and live and work in another country, a lot of organisations are finding ways to support those aspirations as a retention tool.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And global mobility teams themselves, they look after everything from the physical relocation of the individual, so booking their travel often, but also that of their family, sometimes pets, and also moving their household goods. But they do more than that in terms of actually defining the compensation and benefit packages of those individuals to incentivize them to go, but also adapt to the local market requirements. And then with that comes a whole load of compliance, different tax laws, different payroll legislations. And that's really where the payroll topic comes into play. And one thing to note that when businesses do this, they often expose the company themselves, to new tax requirements and also the employee. If you're living and working in one country but technically employed in another, tax jurisdictions tend to want to tax you in both, or there can be lots of complexities around social security and how that payroll actually operates. So it's really is a minefield when it comes to having employees in multiple locations.
I mean, on the surface of it, you mentioned something there which makes total sense to me. One of the great business benefits is if you've got a really exceptional or you have really exceptional talent who doesn't want to leave a business but wants to relocate, it's an opportunity for businesses to, as you say, to retain the best talent and offering flexibility and agility in the solutions they provide. But also it's an opportunity to recruit top talent as well if you're able to hire people in different jurisdictions as well. I mean, they're obvious ones, benefits, I guess, to me in understanding the importance of global mobility from a recruitment perspective, which is the lens that I look through.
Definitely.
Why is it, though, really crucial in today's global business environment beyond the lens of maybe just retaining your staff?
Yeah, well, I think globalization isn't slowing down. If anything, it's speeding up. So businesses who operate in one country, can look to new markets. So there's that whole business growth opportunity. You touched on it, but skill shortages. You may not have access to the market you need in terms of acquiring the skills in one country. Instead of moving or hiring internationally, if you set up a business abroad, you can second people there to train where the talent is. And also just a war on talent in general, having that as the employee value proposition as well, which I know we've touched upon.
Yeah. So what are some of the assignments then that people might be familiar with? Because as we talk about global mobility, when I came into the world of payroll, I always know it as and actually did some placements in relation to international assignee managers and things like that. So tell me a little bit about some of the types of assignment that people might experience if they're involved in global mobility. Just defining that for us.
And I think traditionally you would get a short term or a long term secondment. If you go back, well, certainly towards the start of my career, that's typically where things were. So short term being anything less than 12 months, sometimes less than 9, and then long term anything above 12, up to 5 years essentially. And there are some key differences in those, particularly from a payroll perspective, where if you're on a long-term assignment, you're more likely to actually transition off your home country payroll and go on to the host. And you may maintain benefits in the home, such as pension or protection of your social security. For short-term, it may not make sense to transfer you on the payroll, but you still may create a payroll withholding obligation in the host, which means you need to report your home country pay. So that's the more traditional assignment types. However, there are lots of others, and I'm still learning new ones every week when I talk to people in the industry. There's rotator assignments where you may rotate around a certain number of countries. Commuters, where you're regularly going to one location. I've actually done that myself, as I've mentioned. There are flexpatriates, which is a newer term I learned a few weeks ago, where although you're officially on assignment in one location, you're given the flexibility to choose how much time you spend there. And there's even virtual assignments today where, with the rise of technology, it's easier to do a job from another location. Now, all of those have different considerations when you look at not just how you operate the payroll, but also how you actually compensate the individuals for those roles. And that's, really where the minefield of global mobility payroll kicks in, is all these different arrangements.
Yeah, I've not heard I'm glad you said it was new to you. The flex pack, that was an interesting concept. I was at a talk recently where they were talking about digital nomads and those types. Again, I thought, God, the complexity of that around the passporting and the way that people are located, even for those individuals, and obviously highly skilled technical individuals.
Yeah, and it's interesting on that, Nick. Sorry to cut you off. The immigration is normally, a pressing point on whether people can enter a country to work. Because that's normally a barrier to actually going to another country.
Sure.
But there's equal challenges from a payroll and tax perspective that often are not understood or aren't at the forefront of making those decisions.
So how does payroll in global mobility then differ from domestic payroll, especially regarding some of the legal frameworks, the tax system, the currencies you've mentioned a couple of times already on the show, and also in the context of new disruptors coming into the market, like the employer of record solution we're seeing now, which kind of gives a new consideration for payroll departments or organisations to consider. It'd be great if we could understand a little bit about how the differences between the two, the challenge of moving from one tax system to another, or one legal framework to another. And obviously, this is your expert field, so perhaps you can give us a bit of a rounded understanding.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that on this simplistic terms, I see global mobility or payroll in global mobility as just having more layers. So you mentioned the legal frameworks. If an individual's essentially on two payrolls, then that business is responsible for maintaining them in two separate legal frameworks. Individuals can become taxable in two locations. That's obviously their own personal tax. I wouldn't see any employee being incentivized to pay double tax
No,
based on an assignment, no matter what the kind of personal benefits are. And again, social security rules, you can be forced to come out of your home country social security, or have to again pay in a few locations. And then not to mention just multiple currencies, and also new pay types, which payrolls may not be familiar with. So there's kind of a lot out there. There's more, but just to focus on those. What companies tend to do, certainly on the more traditional assignment types, is tax equalize their employees. So this is a process where they roughly, or sometimes more accurately, calculate the difference between the home and host country tax to ensure the individual is not paying any more tax than if they would have remained in their home country. Now, with that comes a whole new process that you've got to manage. There can be deductions made from a hypothetical tax perspective, which need to be managed through payroll. And the whole time you need to make sure not only does the employee understand it, but that the payroll teams who are operating these processes are clear on what's happening.
There seems to be a lot of complex terms in the world of global mobility. I mean, you've got things like totalization agreements, hypothetical tax, you just mentioned there. Yeah, social security, compensation transparency. I think, this becomes more and more relevant in the world of payroll because, we're seeing more information, more content come out now, in particular in relation to compensation transparency, gender pay gap analysis, things like that, where the data is often at the fingertips of the payroll professionals, and they're able now to utilize that across not just domestic, fluctuations or regional pay gaps, but actually across global pay gaps and differences as well. But also then that ties into things like cost of living differences, which are all, I guess, kind of things that fall right within the sweet spot of the global mobility expert. So with that in mind, what are the main compliance challenges and complexities working in global mobility payroll at the moment? And how do you navigate them?
Yeah, I was going to just an analogy I was told, and I cannot remember who to give the credit to for this. So if they hear this, please feel free to correct me. But I once heard that operating payroll in global mobility is a bit like threading a needle on a roller coaster. So quite challenging. But some of the common challenges are you've got different payroll systems, and often those payroll teams, particularly if they're not used to dealing with this type of worker, are unfamiliar with what needs to happen. So you've got two systems that operate slightly differently, may have different pay codes. That data now needs to be shared with both locations to close off the payroll compliance if an individual is getting paid or is taxable in two locations. And the methods of doing that are usually quite manual and involve a lot of conversations between the payroll teams to understand how they should be treated. So you mentioned COLA, for example, which is a cost of living allowance, which essentially compensates an individual if there is a big difference between the cost of living in their home and host. That is a new pay element for a payroll if they haven't had a previous international worker of this nature. So right from the get-go, they're paying something they're unfamiliar with. They may not know what the tax treatment is on that to process through the payroll system. And sometimes that can be recharged to another location that isn't the norm for their domestic workers, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are the current trends then, or innovations that we're seeing that are currently shaping the world of global mobility? Because you mentioned a couple of things already on the show. One was a virtual expat, I think was the term you used, which is something brand new to me, but it makes sense because we're going into a world of remote work where many people are 100% remote or certainly in hybrid situations. Certainly in the UK, we've gone through making tax digital, but then we are, a first world country. That may not be the same for all global countries and places to go. So I'd be interested to understand what kind of trends you're seeing at the moment and how that's impacting the world of global mobility and from a payroll perspective, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And I think number one, probably like most industries at the moment, is the integration of advanced technology. Would be remiss if I didn't mention AI, but also machine learning and even things like blockchain. So with AI and machine learning, there's just an opportunity to automate some of the manual tasks. So as I briefly mentioned before, a lot of what mobility teams do in collaboration with their payroll colleagues is manually collect data from one country and share it with another in various formats. So one of the major kind of innovations and trends is that there's technology that is easy to implement now, or certainly comes at a much lower cost to implement, that can do some of those manual tasks for you, which are highly automated, can apply, rigorous data validations and checks, and can even flag when there's information missing. That is huge, a huge change. And I do encourage often my global mobility peers to just understand what's out there in that space, because it's not just global mobility technology that's doing that. As you know, it's other payroll softwares or even just tools that do this type of work. And then blockchain, which I feel, was a huge topic a few years back and has kind of been superseded by AI, or certainly in my world. But the whole idea of that, to do highly secure transactions at great speed and accuracy, just lends itself to global mobility and having to pay people in multiple locations, for example. So I think the tech is a huge one, and there's that will just continue to evolve.
It sounds like, as you mentioned earlier, the layering I know you couldn't remember who attributed it to, but the idea of it being layered with the needle on the roller coaster and other bits and pieces, and global mobility, but having so many layers that we put on top of payroll. I recently did an interview with Anne-Marie Viajan, and we were talking about AI on that show. And interestingly, her title is Vice President of Pay Services, Global Mobility and Immigration at Standard & Poor's. Yeah. And within that role, she's responsible for managing global payroll. She's responsible for managing strategic initiatives to optimize payroll, but also to ensure and facilitate seamless global mobility across multiple borders. So from a payroll career perspective, or the evolution of payroll, whichever way you want to look at it, it sounds to me like it's almost too complex to be able to put the two roles together, that you need to have two separate functions, one in global mobility, one in payroll, and they need to be communicating regularly. Or is it possible to have a hybrid type specialist like Anne-Marie clearly is working in at the minute? And if that's the case, do you see that trend continuing as well from a career evolution perspective? Do you see there being more harmonization between the two functions to create more hybrid roles in the future? Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you not exhausted from the endless war for talent battle cries? I think it's time for a fresh approach. Which is why at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing top HR talent. And guess what? We believe we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process, because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding the best HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. Let's break the cycle of frustration together. Join forces with JJ Recruitment and experience the difference in hiring better talent faster. Don't let another day go by without taking action. Contact us today by visiting jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can transform your HR team. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, why not sign up for our weekly HR newsletter? Because it's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. We really hope you can revolutionize your HR department by working with JGA Recruitment. Contact us today.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I've sat on a few panels and been part of webcasts where we're actually talking about this exact point, and who actually owns the global mobility payroll was usually the starting point. Because global mobility teams are not typically payroll experts in multiple jurisdictions around the world, but likewise, payroll experts or domestic payroll experts are not experts in how global mobility compensation works. And therefore, where you normally end up is it's a shared responsibility. So I think certainly, having those roles is a huge help and a big indication from the organization that they want this to be a shared responsibility. But often it's more about, having defined responsibilities within a bigger process that sit between payroll, global mobility. Finance are involved, tax are involved. You often have external vendors that are critical in helping support this type of compliance, given the complexities and the ever-changing compliance landscape. To summarize, yes, I think it's fantastic that these roles are out there. Yes, I do think if organizations make that conscious choice to combine these types of responsibilities, it's helpful. But outside of that, there has to be a clear need to collaborate to make these things work.
Because I think there's another interesting observation that I'm making anyway. I mean, and certainly on the shows I've had in the past, I've talked a lot about, payroll is often seen as being this behemoth department that just spends loads of money out on wages, and understandably so. It's typically the most expensive part of any business is paying your staff. But actually, with some simple use of AI and analytics and other things, you can also view payroll as a cost saving function, because you can save costs, you can save hours, you can make, marginal shifts can have a huge impact in the way that you process payroll, particularly if you're doing over scale of thousands and thousands of employees. So I imagine the same would be true in global mobility, because if you're able to automate some of those things that you've mentioned, and that sort of technology is embedding itself in the world of mobility like it is in payroll, then there must be opportunities to make significant cost savings in the way that you manage tax or compensation, which is going to save an organization both hours and costs and things like that as well. Yeah. So is that something that you are seeing? Are you seeing now global mobility as being able to not just help retain staff? I know it's kind of there to make sure that we're able to look after our employees in the best possible way, and their families often, and things like that. But actually, there's almost a profit element to it as well. We get this right. We don't only just retain our staff, we're also able to save our companies money if we do it the most cost-effective way possible. Would that be something that comes into the remit of a global mobility professional?
Yeah, definitely. And I think most global mobility leaders have that as part of their role. I think part of the challenge in global mobility is where historically a lot of the processes are very manually driven. The global mobility team are often the people having to collect information from various internal stakeholders, liaise with external vendors. What happens is the administration time, or that manual effort, is a big chunk of the role, and has been difficult to reduce. And that's because employees are constantly starting and ending secondments. You constantly have a large number in location where they might have challenges. And given a lot of what global mobility does is also the human support. If somebody has a problem in their host country, whether it's with their accommodation or they're not sure how to do something, they often come to you. So I think there is a big focus on becoming more strategic, and actually some of the other trends in the industry around, and you've mentioned it a few times, is having that real-time data. If you can get that, it does two things. One, it gives you the ability to make decisions based on information. And two, it can actually help you report that for compliance purposes, so into payroll or through a tax return, with much greater efficiency, which means you're not constantly wading through spreadsheets to just meet a compliance requirement. And the combination of those really is help driving more strategic, or a more strategic focus from the global mobility leaders.
Which is great, because that's actually kind of exactly in line with what payroll's trying to do, right? Become more strategic as well by using the same kind of resources. And again, it kind of brings the two things together. So looking ahead then, if we see that as I would consider it one of the exciting opportunities for global mobility, the ability for it to become more strategic as an operation, linking that with payroll, helping payroll to become more strategic as well. What do you see ahead? If you were looking ahead with your crystal ball, what do you see as the future challenges for global mobility payroll? And what do you see as the exciting opportunities that might be around the corner?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the challenges, because I do get quite excited about the opportunities. So let's
challenge is a good place.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about those first. So what I term as like regulatory compliance is not, is becoming more challenging. And there's a few themes at the moment where a lot of governments are targeting what I call the non-voting public, which expatriate workers fall into that category. So instead of raising taxes for the people they want votes from, they're doing it by removing certain regimes which give favourable tax treatment to expatriate workers. And given the amount of countries voting this year, I think there's going to be lots of changes that could come through. And again, the responsibility to navigate those sits with global mobility and the payroll teams. How do you implement them? How do you understand the changes? And typically, the number of global mobility or expatriate workers you have can be as low as 1% of the organisation. And therefore, you're spending an enormous amount of time on a very small number of employees.
Yeah.
Now, how to overcome that? There are experts out there. There's companies that advise, offer services to help you do this. There's even software that can help analyze some of these changes, but it is an investment that has to be made. However, back to your point on cost savings, etc., the cost of getting it wrong is often more than the cost of getting it right the first time round. So I think that's a huge battle that mobility teams face, and compliance is always a moving target in mobility.
Interesting. It's very similar to the argument I would give when working with a specialist recruiter like ourselves, right? I mean, you can find it cheaper by all means, but often if you get it wrong, it's way more expensive than the investment in a specialist firm who has access to the talent. So, that's something I really do understand in the nature of the work that I do.
Yeah.
What about just sticking with challenges for a moment, because something we've seen has been a huge evolutionary shift in relation to payroll is its responsibility now for the employee experience. It's bigger involvement in things like financial well-being, looking after employees. And these are touch points that I don't think payroll really had a few years ago. It was about processing payroll. And actually, that was very much in the realm of HR. But now the employee experience links to, again, employee attraction, retention, experience, all those things. And the Great Resignation really put that into the limelight. If you weren't looking after your employees, they're going to vote with their feet. They're going to go. And payroll's been, I guess, one of the beneficiaries of that shift, because now it is more strategic. It does have a bigger role to play. Presumably, that would be the same for mobility. So you also must be very entrenched in the world of financial well-being and employee-led mobility, and how are you using technology to do those things as well? So are they challenges or are they opportunities in the way that you would look at it?
Yeah, you've led me on to what I saw as the opportunity, actually.
Okay.
So, by no means anything like this is a challenge. I think it's a challenge, as you mentioned, for payroll in general, because the role is shifting, the expectations are higher from the business and the employee. But I just view that as the opportunity. In global mobility, the global mobility team, in collaboration with the stakeholders, are typically responsible for setting the policy which dictates the compensation and benefit terms. Now, this isn't a new theme, but there's flexible policies where an employee gets an element of choice in what they have. So do they want to ship all their goods, or do they want some other allowance, which means they might have some spending power to buy furniture in house, for example, or increasingly picking low carbon options, like I won't fly business class, I'll fly economy, and have a sustainability agenda. All these things are fantastic. However, the business operations, i.e. the payroll and the finance teams, have got to be able to support that policy. So it's all well and good a mobility team having this completely flexible policy where an employee can choose what they get paid, when, which currency, and how. And that's where I think the opportunity is for a mobility team to create that. But they must do it in collaboration with the organisation, because if that has no way of being operationalised, then you're setting yourself up to fail. But that opportunity there for me is all around the personalisation and flexibility. And that can be a real game changer, not just in terms of financial well-being, but also if an employee has a lot of choice in what compensation and benefits they receive, that can be tailored to them. It can be monitored and changed, and it can really fit their fit their requirements for their international work, whether that's on a temporary basis or longer term.
Presumably as well, then, if you're doing that for a global workforce, a global mobility professional and a payroll professional, of course, will need to have some cultural awareness, right? Because things that might be right for us here in the UK or stateside may not be right for someone elsewhere. And you mentioned AI earlier and how that's changing things. And so I think there's a question there for a lot of organizations, but when they're using AI, is culturally, does that work for every workforce as well? And if some countries view AI very differently to the way that we might view it here in the UK or people might view it in the US. So what are some of the cultural awareness or considerations that a professional would need to consider if they're managing both payroll benefits and global payroll teams or global mobility operations?
Yeah, and I think there's the two sort of clear aspects. One is the people aspect. I've worked in a few global organizations and have some funny stories about, trying to explain complex changes to payroll. The person on the other end of the call just saying yes to everything, getting off the call thinking, well, that's fantastic, that went well. And then kind of understanding that culturally, yes means, yes, I hear you, not, yes, I understand, and yes, I will do that. So, it's just about the communication aspect. And again, culturally, the change management piece around, how do you bring your stakeholders along? You need to be culturally aware in order to do that across diverse global teams, especially if you're bringing in new concepts around, global mobility employees or different types of assignment structures. And I don't think that can be underestimated. If you're the opposite of that is not being culturally aware, you will not find you will get the results you intend to do, whether it's a change or just a new process coming in. And then the second, which you mentioned, is the benefit types. So again, just from personal experience, offering someone gym membership in some cultures is actually offensive, implying they need to use that benefit. And likewise, even in some European countries, if you don't include lunch vouchers in your compensation, that can cause massive issues, because obviously lots of other companies would do that, and it's pretty much the norm in some countries. So being tuned in to not just the compliance aspects, but also how compensation and benefits should be delivered and what makes that up in different countries and different cultures is important. And you then have the complexities of the employees' expectations don't typically change. If you boil it down in payroll, they just want to be paid accurately and on time. But obviously, as we've talked about, you can see as you layer on the global mobility processes and everything else with tax equalization, different social security rules, you can find as soon as an employee is now getting a payslip in a different language or from a different system with different tax rules, they can not understand that. And it can be quite complex. So just being attuned to that piece as well, I think, is really important for global mobility teams, but also for payroll professionals as well.
I mean, it does sound like there's a lot of complex considerations that a global mobility professional needs to be aware of. I'd be interested to know, and apologies, I probably could have done this in my research, but I haven't, so that's my full transparency here. But in the world of payroll, if we've got a challenge and we need to stay informed, we need to stay agile, we want to make sure that we're doing the right things in the right location, there are places we can go. In the UK, it's a chartered industry, so we can go to the chartered industry for domestic. If we want to learn more about international, we might go to the Global Payroll Association, or if the US, we might go to Payroll Org. There's various institutions and organizations that we can go to with some real experts in the field that can guide us and help us and give us information. Where do you go for global mobility? Do you go to the same places that payroll people will go to, or do you have your own kind of places or governance where, I don't know, tell me about what you would do in order to stay informed and to stay relevant and up to date?
Yeah, so I think specifically if we've got payroll queries, we would go to the payroll teams, and they would then in turn probably find out from those bodies you mentioned. But normally global mobility teams and businesses have a number of different advisors. They might have an immigration advisor, they may have a tax advisor, they may work with a specific payroll company that do expatriates for them, for example. And then there's a combination of bigger advisors and external consulting firms who do that en masse. So they have a presence in all the countries you need them in. They have trained professionals in tax, labour law, etc. So yeah, we have advisors that we work with, and they typically mirror the countries that the businesses work in to be able to provide that advice.
So last question before we open the vault, David, and actually there may be something else you want to bring up that perhaps I haven't asked because it's your specialist field. So if there is something that you want to bring to the listeners' attention that I haven't asked yet, maybe the question I didn't ask that you were expecting that says actually it'd be really handy for your listeners to know this information, please do bring that to the fore. Before we get there, if I'm a payroll manager listening to this, maybe I've got a global mobility operation within my business, or maybe I don't, but there's a possibility we might need that expertise in the future because our organization is changing, enhancing with mergers, acquisitions, or expansion or whatever it might be. What would be the key collaborative bits of advice you would give to help or enable a payroll professional to manage the complexities of global mobility from a payroll perspective more effectively?
Yeah, I think it's that collaboration piece. So often, and again, I think the numbers highlight it. If you've got 4,000 people on your payroll that you're running monthly, and suddenly you have one expatriate worker that's eating up a lot of your time, I can see how that can be frustrating, particularly if you can't get the answers you need from the global mobility team. But I think it's just seeing things from the other perspective and how much goes into moving these people around the world and what the global mobility team are responsible for. Often payroll is one of 20, 30 different things that they're trying to manage. But that goes both ways, right? I think global mobility need to be more sympathetic about the rules and regulations and the time frames required to process domestic payrolls and how they can be integrated. But that's where I see the biggest opportunity. It's not working in silos. It's really connecting in and understanding how to make it work in the best possible way, not only for the business and the assignee or the employee, but also for the payroll and global mobility teams.
So what would be then, if we open the vault, the one piece of information, if you had, this is your opportunity now to amplify something that helps our listeners move forward, or maybe it's the thing they haven't asked. What would be the thing you'd want to amplify and finish with before we open the vault?
Yeah, well, I think in recent months, I've found myself being more and more curious about, what's out there in the market, what people are doing. And that kind of forms the foundation of some of the posts I put out on LinkedIn. So my advice is just to be more curious. So there are this market, particularly mobility, and as you know, in payroll, is changing all the time. There's lots of new providers out there, new tech. And really, I think it's, the in-house professionals, part of their role is to really be able to understand what's out there and articulate that back to the business, and see how it can, to your point, manage costs, increase efficiency, increase accuracy, or just provide new services to the employees and really help with that talent agenda and retention. So I think be curious would be my one comment.
Great advice. Speaking to my coaching heart.
Yes.
David, I like that. So for those interested, as I said, there will be a link to your LinkedIn profile where you can find some of these articles. But to give people a bit of a flavour, I think the last three that I've seen on there, one was an article about protecting data across borders, cybersecurity and global mobility, data-driven decision-making in global mobility, enhancing the employee experience through digital integration. So, if you're a payroll professional interested in that type of content, it's well worth connecting or certainly following David's post, because, as you say, you do try and amplify a lot of information out there to help professionals, which is really great. And that's how we've come to get you onto today's show, because the content is not AI driven, it's written by yourself, and it comes from an expert eye and 18 years of experience all encompassed in the information you're writing. So definitely recommend people go there. Right, let's open the payroll vault. First question, short, sharp answers from you today. We've got, drawing from your extensive career, what's one piece of timeless advice you'd offer to payroll professionals today?
Consult with your colleagues and ask for advice.
Yeah, nice, perfect. Looking ahead, what do you envision will define the future of payroll?
Employees' expectations.
Let me ask you to expand on that a little bit. I'm quite interested.
I think just their demands on how and when they're paid. Different currencies, if they're working remotely, even things like crypto. So I think companies who can react to that it can be a real differentiator, I think.
It's super interesting. I just don't think we'd have had that conversation or that response 5 years ago. And it just shows how far the industry has moved into that employee experience realm. I just find it absolutely fascinating. I know we've covered it extensively on the show before, and there's lots of content about this as well. But it's so, to see an industry move and shift so much where that now is how you personally as an expert see the future of payroll being defined, just shows how far it's come. And I think the pandemic and other things have helped with that. But yeah, it's really interesting.
And technology, because it's things,
and of course,
it's more possible to tailor benefits packages or even the frequency of pay without causing lots of manual work these days. So.
Absolutely right. And last but not least, a bit of fun. If the payroll industry was a book, a song, or a film, you can pick any of the three. What book, song, or film would it be, and why?
Oh wow, you've really put me on the spot there, Nick. The Never-Ending Story. How's that?
Nice. Well, that's a new one. Go on, explain. Let's give me some context. What's the why behind the Never-Ending Story?
Yeah, I think just, that it's constantly evolving and, people are always going to need to get paid. But how that happens in the future, if you look back from cash in an envelope back in the day to how it's working now, huge change in that time. And as we all know, that those types of changes are getting quicker and quicker with the evolution of technology. So yeah, it will always be there.
Great reference. I think we're both showing our age with that one as well. There'll be some listeners new to the world of payroll or global mobility who will have no idea what that movie is. It was one of my faves growing up. So straight away it gives me the image of the giant, I don't know what it was, dragon thing that's on the front cover. But yeah, and so go and look it up. It's a great movie. If you're interested in anything that's kind of nostalgic and retro from the 80s, whatever year that was made, it's worth taking a look at. Well, look, for those that want to find out more about David's work, if they want to follow his content, please do look at the show notes. There'll be a link directly through to David McAllister's LinkedIn profile. I, of course, want to say a huge thank you to Dave for sharing his valuable insights about global mobility, how to navigate those complexities, and of course, its relationship to payroll, which is so important. The future of payroll, the way I see it, is all about collaboration, whether it's with global mobility, whether it's with HR, whether it's with finance, IT, or whatever else. That's going to be the quickest way to really help raise its profile to the level that I think most of our listeners want to see it. So, David, thank you for helping us with how we can understand and build on those relationships to deliver a more effective, compliant, global payroll service, which I think has been really, really excellent. Of course, for anyone listening to this that needs support with a global payroll-related vacancy, I mean, David very kindly set my sales piece up for me earlier by saying, if you don't go that way and you don't invest, it can cost you a lot more later. I hugely believe that. We would love to work with you if you have a challenging role. Please do get in touch. You can reach our business at jgarecruitment.com. Please do remember to subscribe to the show, as I mentioned in my introduction. Please do share it if you can. Subscribe, leave us a review. I'll be hugely, hugely grateful. And it just leaves me to say one huge thank you to David McAllister for joining me again on the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm your host. I look forward to bringing you the next episode real soon. David, thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Today's episode of the Payroll Podcast has been sponsored by Deel, the all-in-one global people platform that simplifies how you pay your global teams. Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, dedicated points of contact, and more, Deel's fully managed global payroll eliminates third-party handovers and it provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes to payroll regulations before they even become an issue. And with 24/7 monitoring and best-in-class security protocols, your sensitive data is always protected. So are you ready to transform your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes and book your demo with Deel today.